As the days passed, I found myself sinking deeper into a fog of loneliness. It felt as though I was reliving our relationship in reverse, each memory a painful reminder of the love I'd lost. Every little thing reminded me of Mark, the coffee mugs he insisted on collecting from every trip we took, his favorite throw blanket that he'd always wrap around us during movie nights, the sound of his laughter that once filled every corner of our home. Now, the silence was overwhelming, deafening in a way that words could never describe. Friends tried to console me, offering advice and support, but nothing seemed to fill the emptiness. I felt an overwhelming guilt, wondering if there had been signs all along that I'd missed signals that I was taking his love for granted, that maybe I hadn't given him the respect he deserved. I kept asking myself, why had I been so blind to the consequences? What was I truly searching for in suggesting an open marriage when everything I needed was already in front of me? As the weeks turned into months, I realized I had to confront my regrets if I ever hoped to heal. I began to examine the root of my actions, diving deep into memories, analyzing every choice I'd made. Why had I felt so drawn to the idea of an open marriage in the first place? What void had I been trying to fill? Through long, tear-filled nights, I discovered truths about myself I'd never faced. I realized that, deep down, I had feared stagnation in our marriage, worried that my own sense of individuality was disappearing into the routine we'd created together. But my mistake was thinking that an open marriage was the only way to reawaken that part of myself. I hadn't considered the possibility of rediscovering who I was within the boundaries of my existing marriage. Nor did I respect the value of our commitment enough to explore those feelings in other ways. At this point, I began attending therapy on my own, determined to untangle the layers of regret, guilt, and confusion within me. In therapy, I learned more about myself than I ever thought possible. My therapist helped me understand that while my longing for personal growth was valid, the path I'd chosen was hurtful not only to Mark, but to myself as well. I'd placed a misguided desire above the stability and love I had with my husband. I started to understand how fear of being boxed in, fear of losing myself, had led me to make such a painful misstep. After months of working on myself, I decided to reach out to Mark, hoping that time and space had eased some of the tension between us. I was cautious in my approach, knowing that he might not want to hear from me. But I needed to take responsibility for my actions, to share with him the growth and understanding I'd gained through this journey. If nothing else, I owed him an apology free of expectations. To my surprise, he agreed to meet. We sat across from each other in a small cafe, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. For the first time, I saw him not as the man I'd married, but as someone I had hurt deeply, someone who had trusted me completely and had been left scarred by that trust. "I'm sorry, Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't even begin to explain how much I regret what I did. I know I've hurt you, probably in ways I can't even understand. I never meant to make you feel like you weren't enough. I was searching for something I thought I'd lost, but I didn't realize it was right in front of me the whole time." Mark nodded, his eyes downcast, his fingers tracing patterns on his coffee cup. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking too. It was hard, hearing you say you wanted something more, something outside of us. It made me question everything, made me wonder if I'd failed you somehow." His words stung, but they were a necessary part of the healing. I needed to hear his pain, to feel the weight of what I'd done to him. It was only fair. "I know it's not an excuse," I said, "but I want you to know that I've been doing a lot of work on myself. I know now that I was running from my own fears, not from our marriage." I'm sorry for putting that weight on you. If I could go back and change it, I would in a heartbeat." He looked at me, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd always been patient and kind, even in the face of my own flaws. We sat there in silence for a long time, each lost in our thoughts, reflecting on the love we'd once shared and the pain we'd caused each other. Over the following weeks, we began a slow and tentative process of reconnecting. We agreed to meet once a week, not as a couple, but as friends trying to heal. Our conversations were raw, often painful, but they were also honest in a way we hadn't been in years. We talked about our fears, our disappointments, and the love that still lingered between us, though bruised and battered. During this time, I made a conscious effort to rebuild my life in a way that didn't depend solely on my relationship with Mark. I joined new classes, picked up forgotten hobbies, and started forming a sense of self independent from the marriage. In finding my own identity, I became stronger, more self-aware. Ironically, the very thing I'd sought in the wrong way was beginning to materialize, but this time, in a way that allowed me to value the love Mark and I had shared without needing to compromise it. Months later, when we finally broached the topic of whether we should try to rekindle our relationship, we both knew we had changed. We weren't the same people who had fallen in love 5 years ago, but maybe that was a good thing. The hurt had reshaped us, but so had the healing. We were now two individuals who understood the importance of open communication, honesty, and respect for each other's emotional boundaries. We agreed to take things slow, to explore this new version of us without rushing. It wasn't the fairy tale romance we'd once shared. It was something different, something real and fragile, but it was built on a stronger foundation. This time, I approached the relationship not out of need or dependency, but with a genuine appreciation for the person Mark was, flaws and all. Reflecting on this journey, I realized that my mistake had taught me invaluable lessons. I'd learned the importance of communication, of self-reflection, and of respecting the boundaries that come with commitment. Love, I realized, isn't about constant excitement or new experiences. It's about showing up, even in the hard times, and working through the difficulties with an open heart. As Mark and I continued our journey, rebuilding step by step, I found myself grateful not for the pain we'd endured, but for the growth that had come from it. We'd become two people who had weathered a storm, learning that real love is built on resilience, understanding, and forgiveness. Our love wasn't perfect, nor was it what it once was, but in its new, scarred, and more humble form, it had transformed into something more enduring. We were no longer bound by naive idealism. Instead, we were united by a commitment to face life's challenges together, knowing that our bond had been tested and strengthened. In the end, it wasn't the spark of excitement I'd once craved that gave our love its strength. It was the quiet resilience that had brought us back to each other, helping us find a deeper, truer version of the love we had both been searching for all along. The weeks that followed our separation were a fog of sadness and regret. Life without Mark felt surreal and hollow. He had been the foundation of my world, and now I was left trying to rebuild that world alone. I missed him deeply, the inside jokes that no one else understood, the way his laughter filled our home, the quiet comfort of our routines that had once felt mundane but now felt like irreplaceable moments. I threw myself into work, spent more time with friends, and even took up new activities, but nothing seemed to fill the void he'd left behind. Therapy quickly became a lifeline, a place where I could unravel the mess of emotions that seemed too overwhelming to face alone. I learned about forgiveness, not only for him, but for myself, a concept I had struggled to accept. Every session was a reminder of my mistakes, of the road I had chosen that led us to this painful place. But it was also a slow journey towards self-compassion. Each session left me raw, yet inching toward a sense of healing, of making peace with what I couldn't change. I realized that holding on to the past, to my missteps and regrets, was only holding me back from the future I deserved. As the weeks turned into months, I found small pockets of solace in activities I had once neglected. I rediscovered my love for writing, and every day, I poured my feelings onto the page. My journal became a sanctuary, a place where I could express the emotions that felt too overwhelming to voice. I wrote about love and loss, about regret and forgiveness, hoping that by capturing these experiences in words, I could make sense of the turmoil in my heart. The writing wasn't a cure, but it was a balm, a way to externalize the pain that had settled inside me like a weight. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old photos in an attempt to declutter, I found a picture from our honeymoon, a candid shot of us laughing on the beach as the sun dipped below the horizon. The memory was bittersweet. It reminded me of a time when our love had been untouched by complications, when we had been young and hopeful, imagining a future that now seemed so distant. But in that moment, something shifted in me. I realized I had been holding on to the memory of our love as if it were something I needed to possess forever. Maybe I needed to honor it instead, to acknowledge the beauty of what we'd shared without letting it hold me back. That realization marked the beginning of a new chapter. Slowly, I began to move forward, learning to embrace life on my own terms. I still thought about Mark every day, and some days the regret felt as raw as it had in the beginning. But there was a quiet resilience building inside me. I knew I had to let go not just of him, but of the version of myself that had made those choices. It was time to become someone who could love, live, and move on without being haunted by the past. Nearly a year had passed since our separation, when I finally felt ready to reach out to him. I wrestled with the decision for weeks, wondering if it would bring more harm than closure. But something in me felt the need to apologize, not out of a hope for reconciliation, but to bring a sense of peace, to show him that I had grown and taken responsibility for the pain I had caused. With a deep breath, I typed a message, apologizing for the hurt, expressing the regret I had carried, and hoping he might see that I was ready to acknowledge my mistakes fully. To my surprise, he replied. His message was brief and cautious, but the fact that he had answered at all gave me a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find some kind of resolution. Our first conversation was tentative, filled with long pauses and the weight of emotions that had gone unspoken for too long. We shared what we had experienced in our time apart, and I listened as he spoke of his lingering hurt, his feelings of betrayal, the trust he'd struggled to rebuild on his own. I let him express the pain without interruption, knowing I needed to truly hear him, to understand the depth of what he had endured. After that initial conversation, we continued talking sporadically. We exchanged messages and occasionally, long phone calls that felt equal parts healing and painful. With every conversation, we shed layers of resentment and began to rediscover a sense of respect and understanding that had been buried beneath the weight of our history. Eventually, we agreed to meet for coffee, a neutral ground where we could see each other face to face, not as the people we once were, but as individuals who had grown in different ways. Seeing Mark again was surreal. There was a familiarity that tugged at my heart, but also a recognition that we were no longer the same people who had once shared a life. We talked for hours, sifting through the memories and emotions that had kept us tethered. The conversation was cathartic, filled with tears and laughter, as we acknowledged the parts of ourselves that had changed and the parts that still connected us. Healing was a slow process, sometimes frustrating and sometimes beautiful. There were moments when old wounds resurfaced, and it felt like we were tearing off scabs that hadn't fully healed. But there were also moments of forgiveness, of quiet acceptance, of rebuilding something new out of the pieces of what we had lost. In time, we began to consider the possibility of a new beginning, not one that would erase the past, but one that would honor it and learn from it. We agreed to take things slowly, with no expectations or pressure. Our love, scarred and bruised, had transformed into something quieter, more resilient. It wasn't the idealistic romance we had once dreamed of, but a love that had been tested and had emerged stronger. In rebuilding, we discovered a kind of strength that had been hidden beneath the surface all along. We weren't trying to return to what we once had. Instead, we were building something new, something that respected the lessons we had learned and the individuals we had become. Looking back, I realized that regret had shaped me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It had forced me to confront my own flaws, to understand the value of communication, and to recognize that true love requires patience, humility, and a willingness to weather the storms together. I had learned that love isn't just about the good times, it's about surviving the trials, finding grace in the pain, and choosing to fight for each other, even when things seem darkest. Mark and I will never be the same people we were when we first fell in love. But in this new chapter, I see us as two individuals who have walked through fire and emerged with a deeper understanding of what it means to love unconditionally. Our love is scarred, but it's real, resilient, and worth every moment of the journey it took to get here. The weeks that followed our separation were a haze of sadness and regret. Life without Mark felt surreal, like someone had taken the color out of the world. I missed him deeply, the quiet routines we shared, the easy laughs, and even the way he used to make mundane moments feel special. I threw myself into work and spent more time with friends, hoping to fill the emptiness he'd left behind. But nothing seemed to work. Therapy became my lifeline. Every session was a painful reminder of my mistakes, a place where I could confront my choices and learn about forgiveness and self-compassion. I wanted to make sense of what had led me to suggest an open marriage in the first place. In those sessions, I explored my own fears, insecurities, and the restless longing for something new that had ultimately driven us apart. I started to see that, beneath the excitement of new experiences, I had lost sight of what truly mattered in our relationship. Time passed, and as the months rolled by, I began to rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten. I poured my feelings onto paper, turning to writing as a way to process my emotions. I wrote about love, regret, and the complexity of relationships, hoping that by putting words to my pain, I could somehow release it. I still thought about Mark every day, but the sharpness of the regret softened with time, making room for a new perspective. One day, while sorting through old photos, I found a picture from our honeymoon. We were laughing on the beach, the sun setting behind us, looking as though nothing could ever come between us. The memory was bittersweet, reminding me of the joy we once shared and sparking a new realization. Maybe it was time to move forward, to honor the love we had without holding on to what could never be. Months later, with my heart still heavy but more settled, I finally found the courage to reach out to Mark. I sent him a message, apologizing sincerely for the pain I'd caused and expressing my regret. I didn't expect a response, but wanted him to know that I had grown and taken responsibility for my mistakes. To my surprise, he replied, cautiously but kindly, opening a door I hadn't thought would ever open again. Our first conversation was hesitant and filled with pauses, but it was also a chance for us to release the hurt we'd been holding on to. He spoke about his lingering feelings of betrayal, and I listened without interrupting, finally understanding the depth of the pain my proposal had caused. Our conversations continued slowly, and with each one, we shed a bit more of the bitterness and replaced it with a glimmer of forgiveness. Eventually, we decided to meet for coffee, and seeing him again was surreal. We talked for hours, sifting through old wounds and finding small moments of healing. It wasn't an easy road, and there were days when the scars of the past felt like they'd never fade. But gradually, we began to rebuild, not to recapture what was lost, but to create something new. In time, I came to understand that real love isn't just about the joyful moments, but about surviving the difficult ones. It's about growing through pain, learning from mistakes, and choosing each other, even when things are hard. Mark and I had walked through fire, and though our love had been scarred, it emerged stronger and more resilient. Looking back, I realized that our journey wasn't just a story of heartbreak, but of resilience and a testament to the power of forgiveness and growth.